Bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Good morning, everyone. Today we will be focusing on some ultimate realities that we have talked so far. Till now, we discussed about the idea of ultimacy, then the characteristics of the ultimate realities. Like we divided everything into two groups, the ultimacy, like paramattha, into conditioned and unconditioned. And under the conditioned category, we named 4 groups: Paramatta Dhammas, Upadino Dhamma, Paramatta Jatika, and Anupanna Dhamma. And on the unconditioned group, there were 5 types of nirvana. Then apart from them, is the concepts we call the panyati. And then also in between, we shall discuss some points like the 3 characteristics, the 10 anippanna rupas, and so forth. So far we have discussed some basic characteristics of Paramatta Dhammas. So far, Paramatta Dhammas. And today we shall start a brief explanation. It's not a detailed one, a brief explanation about what are these ultimate realities. Because otherwise, if someone is new to this Theravada Buddhism, just mentioning about the ultimate realities without mentioning who they are would lead to some confusion, or it may be a daunting task to understand what actually they means. Therefore, I have decided to give some brief explanations about the chitta, about the chetasikas, about the rupas, and then move on to the other conditioned ultimate states, such as Upadino Dhamma and so forth. The biggest challenge for a newcomer to this arena of Buddhism would be these Pali terms, because I'll be using, most of the time I'll be using exactly the Pali terms, because that what I understood was the translation would lead to can give more troubles long term. It would be much easier if we can keep with the Pali terms. Maybe they're just 1 or 2 words, but when we translate some words, like for instance, Upadino Dhamma, there can be I think the scholars would have invented a good word for that, but to get the idea, it's a explanation that needs 1 or 2 sentences. So rather than giving them the English translation, I think in long term, it would be beneficial if we can keep with the Pali terms. So that's why I'm using these Pali terms. But with the repetition during this course, which will run for 20 days, as this, according to this session, I'll be repeating the similar Pali words again and again. So that would also help many to memorize them, or to for them to stick in their minds. So if we move on to explain a revision, like a brief revision of what we have done so far. So we divided the entire thing, what it really exists, as Paramattha, and it was divided into 2 groups, Sankhata Paramattha and Asankhata Paramattha. Then in the Sankhata group, we explain 4 categories. Paramatta Dhamma, Upadino Dhamma, then Paramatta Jatika and Anupanna Dhamma. These are the 4. Then in the Asankata Paramattas, we had 5. Sammuti, Nibbana. Then we have Tadanga, Nibbana, Vikambana, Nibbana. Then we have Samuchcheda, Nibbana, and we have Nissarana, Nibbana. So these are the entire group of Paramattas, ultimate realities. So out of the, apart from them is the, if we can make a huge, very clear distinction, we have something called Panyati. Panyati are concepts. So when we say concepts, like sometimes it refers to ideas, like about the life or the world. Sometimes we have viewpoints. Sometimes we have explanations. They may also all be concepts. But in Buddhism, when we say concepts, we do include such viewpoints about the life. Those thoughts, like those ideas that we have, also can be said as concepts. But mainly here what we refer is looking into the ultimate realities, cognizing the ultimate realities, which we will be explaining from today onwards in what they are. So the mind started to synthesize or create, construct a new object or one object based on the realities. So that created object the mind cognizes is called the concept. Then in between these 2 categories, like Paramatta and concepts, because I'll just draw a broken line, because to show that this group belongs to this side, this group belongs to this side, we have things called 3 characteristics, Tilakkana. I think you have heard about impermanence, the nature of bringing suffering, the non-selfness, Tilakkana, Anicca, Dukkha, Anatta, which is very famous in Buddhist teachings. So that is 3 characteristics. 3 characteristics of realities are not ultimate, exactly not ultimate, and they are not concepts. They are something which stand in between. In between means they are connected to ultimate realities, but exactly they are not realities. Then we have another 10 called Anipanna Rupas. Today we will start this lesson. In this we find Nama and Rula, matter and mind and matter both. So there are certain types of qualities of Rupas, which we'll discuss later, that does not fit into this group. Then we also have some Paccaya Sati we call, right? We'll be discussing them in future lectures. So even they seems to be very new, don't worry about them. We shall be discussing them one by one. So these are some other things that does not exactly fit into this group, but are related with the ultimate natures. Paccaya Sati means certain forces of conditions. And then we also have something called Gati. Gati means the existence. Existence is threefold, can be explained as threefold. One part, one aspect of Gati, and then we have the space, right? In Pali, we call it Akasa, Ajatakasa. Anyway, I'll just write it as space because it's easy to understand. So these are the things that are not exactly Panyati, but fit into this group. Some would have been surprised, like this space has been explained in some Buddhist sects to be an unconditioned reality, but in the Theravada aspect, because we are talking about the Theravada aspect, it is neither said as a ultimate reality, but not as a concept. So this is the entire chart of the what really exists, or how the Theravadians look into the world. So during these lectures, we'll be discussing about each and every aspect of this chart. So this is like these 20 lectures is like an introduction to what the fundamentals of the Theravada teachings, fundamentals of the Theravada teachings. So these are the aspects that we are covering in these lectures. So far, we introduced the characteristics of Paramatta, and we introduced the characteristics of conditioned realities, and then we moved on to Paramatta Dhamma, and today we are going to start what they are. And there was some were suggesting that I better distributed a handout about what we have so far discussed. Actually, I have written them into, already made them into a book, like already made the handouts, because this is the second time that I do this course. But thing was, I had to do some revision and corrections on the previous handouts, and also I'm conducting the same course in Sinhala language uh, 5 days per week. So therefore, I am translating those handouts into Sinhalese, and I had some difficulties in finding time to revise them. But I'm hopefully I'll be able to distribute a complete handout by next week about all the 20 courses, all the entire handout for the all these courses. I'm hopefully to be able to distribute by next week. So then everyone has something on their hands while we explain this. I know that if someone is a newcomer, these lessons will be sometimes somewhat difficult to grab, because they are, or most of them will be, most of these terms will be new to the vocabulary. The concept is, the idea is something new to our minds. The thing I had was, I had some difficulties in finding time to completely revise the handouts that I have so far written. So if we have that in a handout, all the lectures, you can, the listeners can prepare in advance even, and before we get into the lectures. So now, so far, what we have discussed, what is Paramatta? Paramatta means, if I just give a brief, very briefly, Paramatta means the meaning is the existing nature of something that can be found. Panyatis are not existing natures. These things cannot be found in the ultimate sense. These panyatis cannot be found in the ultimate sense. These paramatta can be found. Then these paramattas are not hidden. They can be empirically observed, most of them. Then there are two types of such natures, Sankata and Asankata. Sankata was conditioned. Condition means it depends on other natures to exist. Then Asankatas do not need such dependence. Then we moved on to Paramatta Dhammas. So among them, Paramatta Dhammas are the main part. They are just stages of Paramatta Dhammas. Though we categorize them as 1, 2, 3, 4, what we have to keep in mind is these are the main part. This is the core essence of this subject. These are just stages of this Paramatta Dhammas. That will be clear when we come into these lessons. So these Paramatta Dhammas, we gave some basic characteristics. They arise together with some other Paramatta Dhammas. They arise together with some other Paramatta Dhammas, and they have their own intrinsic nature. They have a unique intrinsic nature. Mind has a unique intrinsic nature. Mental factors, each mental factor has unique intrinsic natures, and Rupa has unique intrinsic nature. Then we also mentioned that these Paramatta Dhammas in the observable world, when we analyze intellectually, what we find, we analyze intellectually, what we end up are the Paramatta Dhammas. They are irreducible. They are irreducible. In the intellectual analysis, we find the irreducible elements are called the Paramatta Dhammas. And also we mentioned a certain Paramatta Dhamma has a characteristic. The characteristic and the Paramatta Dhamma. The characteristic and the Paramatta Dhamma are identical. There is no duality in Paramatta Dhamma and its characteristic. For instance, if you say Patavi, Patavi is hardness. Hardness itself is Patavi, and Patavi itself is hardness. There's no duality in them. Then we discuss about the arising and passing nature of Paramatta Dhammas, arising and passing nature. If something has arisen and passed away, that is considered as a past Paramatta Dhamma, Atita Paramatta Dhamma. If something has arisen but not passed away yet, that is a Pachuppanna or present Paramatta Dhamma. If something has not arisen yet, that is called a future Paramatta Dhamma. Then also we discussed that every conditioned Paramatta Dhamma has three basic characteristics called arising, persisting, passing away. The three phases the Paramatta Dhammas go through: arising, persisting, and passing away. The characteristics are they arise, they decay, and they pass away. They arise, they decay, and they pass away. So these are the things that we so far discussed, the highlights. Now, today what we are going to do is, what are these Paramatta Dhammas? What are they? So we see mainly two groups of them. Sorry, we see mainly two groups. We call them Nama and Rupa. Nama and Rupa. These are the two groups of these Paramatta Dhammas. Nama means mentalities. Rupa means materiality. Materiality and mentality. When we say mentality, this refers to the consciousness, the cognitive ability of ourselves. Materiality is the particles, or we can say the stuff out of which this material world is made of. So it's like when the material things come together, they appear as things. That is the materiality part. Our bodies are made out of materiality. Bodies are made out of Rupa. The outer world is made out of Rupa. But the living beings has an extra feature in themselves, that they are conscious about the things. This consciousness, so we call it the consciousness. So that consciousness, or the awareness of the outside world or about our own selves, is called the aspect of Nama. So this Nama is further divided into two, not the Rupa part, as Chitta and Cetasika. This Nama part, by which we are aware of the world and about ourselves. This is what we generally call the consciousness, the cognitive part of our life, the part which makes the cognition. So this is again twofold as Chitta and Cetasikas. This is a completely separate part, Rupa. So a being, normally we say, is a constitution of these two. It's a constitution of these two. To understand this clearly, first we have to think what is a being. Like for example, if we take ourselves, we think this is a person. But when we analyze this, the person, the self-identity, we find, according to the Buddhist analysis, when we analyze this identity or this self or I in terms of intellectual, when we scrutinize this, the idea of I, we end up in two arenas: the conscious part, the unconscious, the material part and the conscious part. So before we go into this subject, into the Buddhist aspect, there can be a question or a problem, we would say a question that would arise is, according to our general understanding, the knowledge that prevails in the present world, especially based on science, we advocate a material world. We call it materialism. Everything is made out of material stuff. According to particle physics, it's made out of small particles like electrons, neutrinos, and so forth. And also our conscious ability, the ability to cognize, the ability to think, the ability to make decisions is attributed to the neurons of our brain and also to the spinal cord. So together, the spinal cord and the brain constitute the neuro system. So with that, a being is aware of the world. So the greatest challenge someone may have is to understand, distinguish what is nama and what is rupa, because according to some, the entire thing is a functioning of rupa. I have heard of one person who was really interested in Abhidhamma, about the chittas and chetasikas, which we are going to explain in brief, start the explanation. It will run for few lectures. What is this chitta, what are these chetasika, and what are these rupa? So before we go into that, as an introduction, so that person was reluctant to, he was very happy with the Abhidhamma analysis, the teachings, but being a doctor, he was reluctant to study because what he felt was all the conscious activities that we have can be attributed to rupa because it can be explained through brain. It can be explained through the brain, through the cells like the neurons. So therefore, it is very important that we distinguish how we understand the consciousness first, a little bit, like with a logical aspect. Why it makes sense, why consciousness is necessary. That is a important thing to find out before we go into the plunge into the consciousness. If someone is based on faith towards Buddhism, this won't be a question for him. But I think most of you have heard what is the relationship between brain and the consciousnness. Isn't the brain is functioning as the consciousness? Because when certain parts of the brain are inactive, our certain conscious abilities, we lose certain conscious abilities. Certain parts of the brain is removed. We loses the creativity of ourselves. Sometimes we lose the mathematical aspect of the cell of ourselves abilities. So likewise, we have already attributed certain parts of the brains with the abilities, certain abilities, that conscious abilities we have. I know it's also not exactly same for every person. The location may change according to neuroscience. So how do we understand that consciousness is necessary? So one aspect, there are two main arguments for this to understand why a different element called consciousness is necessary and why it has been advocated, expressed in Buddhist teachings. So when we talk about the brain itself, so we normally, according to science, brain is a closed system. It's a closed system. The functioning happens based on chemicals, the reaction of chemicals. So what happens is when the chemicals are limited in our cells and the neurons are limited, though they are very high in number. So when a certain object, we encounter a certain incident. So if there's only materiality, what happens is, so there are certain functionings or reactions going on in our brain, in our cell, in our body. So that brings the reaction that we make, that brings the response that we make to a certain incident, So what happens is, if this is a closed system, if we have a very high technology, if the science is going to a high level of technology, or if the person is really intelligent, special like a divine being or someone, he'll be able to make an algorithm. Able to make an algorithm what is going to happen, because if the chemicals are limited, if it's a closed system, there's no inputs, then when we encounter an incident, if the technology is very high, we are able to see we will be able to predict what is going to happen. Because in the material world, it has been proven, except in the quantum level, it is a normal fact that we are able to predict what would happen. That is called causality. The functions of materiality is always based on prior incidents. It's also always based on prior incidents. Even in quantum mechanics, we are able to see the range where the things can exist. So therefore, if we talk about the consciousness, it's a very huge matter, even among the scientists. If we talk about the consciousness based on rupa only, matter only, what happens? All our decisions are already determined. Because to the level of it was like someone would respond by hitting someone to a certain thing, because the level of chemicals was based on the level of the chemicals that he had in his brain at that moment. The response came according to that level. So it means his decision was inevitable. It was not possible that he could change that decision, because it's only materiality is existing. So therefore, we lose the idea of free will. There will be no free will if it is just material stuff. And then the next thing is the conscious experience that we have, the conscious experience. Like when I'm talking, I have my own experience of looking into this camera, thinking about what others would thinking of trying to imagine how the audience would understand what I say. So there's a lot of thinking going on at this moment, which is not plausible to attribute to the material thing. So therefore, the conscious experience is another important factor that cannot be explained entirely with material. How much experiments we do in the brain, always we are explaining the mechanism, not the conscious experience itself. The conscious experience itself is a completely different thing from materiality. So therefore, these are the questions that the brain science is still struggling to find out. So personally, I feel, and also some scientists or philosophers feel, that it is impossible that this thing can be explained with material thing. Because when you lose the free will, the final point I want to express is, when we don't have the free will, we lose the responsibility of our actions. Because it's not that it's not that we have done the action, it's just an outcome of the material mechanism. So then, but what happens is, it's going to lead to huge problems, because our legal system, politics, laws, everything is based on the free will. Because why we punish someone for his wrongdoings, the underlying philosophy that he would have acted responsibly, and he would have not done that. He would have controlled himself. For his irresponsibility that we punish someone. So therefore, the entire world, the general conscious is that everyone has a free will. So therefore, before we do a certain action, there were stimuli to do that action, but always there was a possibility that I could have prevented it. There's always a possibility. The possibility of could have prevented, could have not done it, shows that there is always yes and no possibility already existed, and that cannot be explained just with chemical reactions. Therefore, we advocate a separate element, a completely separate element from rupa. So the necessity is, since we have free will, since we have responsibilities in ourselves, since we have a special experience, the conscious experience that is different from the material stuff, it means there is some kind of a special element that cannot be boiled down or that cannot be reduced into the material thing. So that immaterial, we call immaterial, which is different from the material arena realm, is called nama. This is the consciousness. So this consciousness in Buddhist teachings have two main aspects. Now we are going into that, two main aspects. Before that, we also need to explain, even though rupa is a completely different sphere or a realm from consciousness, but the consciousness greatly depend on this part of the body. That also we have to understand. It greatly depend on this part. Now I go into the Theravada tradition. So in the Theravada tradition, it says that nama has an influence of rupa. Rupa is this body. This body has a great influence to this conscious experience. There's a great influence to the conscious experience. But it has not explained how the brain affects the consciousness. It has not detailed explanations on that. Brain is just a mere body part that should be considered as repulsive, according to the Theravadians. Brain is just a repulsive body part, which is an object of the Asubha Bhavana. Its contribution to the consciousness is not expressed. But the connection of rupa to the nama is greatly expressed. For example, there is according to the philosophy, there is something like two types of bile. Just to give a hint on that idea, bile we call pitta, in Sinhalese pittang. Pitta, which is the yellow color liquid that is in our body. So according to the literature, there are two types of bile, right? I'm not saying that this is scientifically proven or anything. So just to want to show that this support of rupa to the nama, effect of the rupa to the nama has been expressed. Then we can try to understand how brain is related to consciousness. So the bile pitta, there are two types of bile, baddha and abadda. So there is the inside, like the bile which is inside a certain organ. If it gets activated, if it comes out, according to the tradition, it says that it is inevitable, it cannot be prevented, that this bile, the baddha pitta, makes the consciousness or the person to become insane. He becomes mad, like he loses his conscious the restraining ability, and he is unable to respond as a conscious sane person. So what does it mean? That material thing, even though consciousness is expressed as a different element from material thing, the Theravadians advocate that the material sometimes can go completely overcome the consciousness and completely jeopardize the thing. Completely, it can bring into a chaos. So the same thing should be applied to the brain. In my understanding, the brain has a great effect to the consciousness. According to the Theravadians, consciousness is located in the heart, according to the meditative experiences, but brain is somewhere else. So these brain neurons have a certain, even though they are locally different locations, they have a great effect on the consciousness. That is also another aspect is Buddhism. It means consciousness located in one place can affect the entire body, nama to rupa. It is not necessary they have a physical connection. And then some material stuff locally found in the parts of the body, can affect the entire body. So this is the idea of Theravadians. So the material thing can, some part in the body can affect somewhat to the entire body. The consciousness can affect the entire body. The same thing that the certain bile and so forth, which are in the certain parts of the body, can affect the consciousness. So in the same way, the neurons that are found in our brain, it has been proven that they do have a great relationship to our conscious ability. So these functionings, even though consciousness is located in a different place locally in the heart, according to Theravadians, it has a great effect. So this effect, it's not necessary, according to the Theravada tradition, it is not necessary that they are connected like this. There is no, it's not necessarily they are connected with the material line. It's an ability of the rupa to affect the nama, because this is considered as a one circuit, one life. So this entire life means the body and the mind, they are interrelated, not physical. It's not necessary to be physically. Even there is some kind of a mysterious connection with the mind and the brain. So therefore, even though we say it's a completely a new dimension from this, they are greatly interrelated. So with that insight, we now go into this conscious part. Later, we'll try to analyze this rupa. We'll not be talking about how it affects. We are going to analyze what this rupa is. The next purpose is, with this analysis, what is our aim? What is our intention? To understand that there is no self. It's only a bunch of nama and rupa existing correlated to each other. And then final aim goal is to understand what vipassana is in this, according to this Theravada philosophy, and how do we practice, how do we understand, how do we apply this knowledge into our insight practice. So that is the aim. So now I think it's little bit somewhat clear that what is the difference of nama, what is the difference of rupa, and this is the cognition part of the life, and this consciousness, which is called nama. Try to remember the word nama. Nama is twofold, achitta and cetasika, and this is a completely different aspect, but they are greatly interrelated depending on each other. So now we move on to nama aspect. I think I shall erase this. Nama. Nama is the connection of chitta and cetasika. Chitta, another word for chitta is vijnana. Another word is mano. Another is manasa. So there are 11 synonyms that we can find in our literature, in Dhammasangani, for this thing. There can be more synonyms according to sutras, but according to the Abhidhamma explanations, we have 11 words. Cetasikas we normally translate as mental factors. So how do we understand these two? In reality, chitta, these are synonyms, right? These are not categories, these are synonyms, same thing. So chitta and cetasika, they exist together. So there are two types of coexisting. We also mentioned nama and rupa, the consciousness and the material thing, are interdepending. When the consciousness disappears, Rupa starts to decay or rotten. Rupa starts to decay or rotten. When the Rupa is greatly affected or injured or damaged, we normally say killed, like something physical adversities come to our body that are not bearable anymore. So what happens? Consciousness cannot sustain on that body. When the consciousness disappears, sometimes we say as departs. When we say departing, it gives a self idea like a bird flying from a tree to tree. Buddhism doesn't advocate such an idea, but some Buddhist sects talk about something called Antarabhava, a life in between, but Theravadians do not accept this. So if the consciousness disappears and appears in another place as a new life, this body starts to rotten. It cannot sustain. So there is something called vitality, which is required for the body to sustain, according to the tradition. Then, if the body is greatly affected, the consciousness cannot last any longer. So they are coexisting, supporting each other. That is one type of coexistence. Now, the coexistence of Chitta and Chetasika is more mutual than this. They have a more intimate relationship than the Nama and Rupa coexistence. So Nama and Rupa also exist together. The Nama has two aspects. There is another two elements existing together. So they are mixed with each other. They are mixed with each other. Later on, we find in the Rupa also, there are few elements existing together. In the Rupas also, they are existing together. If you remember, in the first lecture, I mentioned, what we have is Rupa clusters, the material clusters, and the mental clusters, right? Material clusters and mental clusters. Material clusters were coined as Rupa Kalapa. Mental clusters were coined as, named as Chittupada, So in this Chittupada, we have two aspects, Chitta and Chetasika. So there were some questions about how do we distinguish these two. This is a very basic thing. So before we go in detail about the Chittas, we have to have a clear understanding, the distinction between these two. There's a striking distinction when we think intellectually. But in practicality, we find them always together. They are inseparable, practically inseparable. Intellectually, they are separable. We can observe a distinct, striking difference in them. So how do we understand this? So we'll first focus on Chitta or Vijnana, whatever it is, whatever the word it is. So how do we explain Chitta or Vijnana? For that, we need to think about the object. Object is called Arammana. In Pali, Arammana. What is an Arammana? In the conscious experience, think about the conscious experience that we have. We are aware of something. Consciousness means being aware of something. Can be something outside or can be something inside. This awareness. So awareness is always about something. Awareness is always about something. The content of the awareness, the content means what the awareness itself is a one aspect. Awareness itself is a one aspect which cannot be explained materially. That's why we needed a separate element called consciousness. Then it is aware about something. It's aware about something. In the beginning, it is very difficult to distinguish this difference, this duality. In Buddhism, we talk about Nama Rupa duality. Then this Nama, consciousness, is aware of Arammana. This is not a coexisting. This is not a coexistence. This is the awareness of something. Awareness of something. That is the ability of the consciousness. That is the ability of nama to be aware of something. The thing which is aware of is not nama. Nama is not this. The conscious experience is one thing. The aware of which the awareness is, about which the awareness is something else. So therefore, when we talk about nama, we should know what is the object of nama. This is, when we say the object, sometimes someone can be confused. Sometimes we say objectivity, right? When I do something, I have a objective. There's an objective always. Like why do I go to the dining hall? My purpose is to eat. Why do I do this lecture? To share the knowledge that I have gained. Another objective is to clarify my own path. So likewise, there can be objects. Why someone listens to the lecture? Because they want to understand what Theravada Buddhism is. So these are objectives of our actions, motives of our actions. Here, object doesn't mean that motive or the objectivity, that objective that we have. This is the thing. This is the we call the word should be used as the thing about which we are aware of. So therefore, Arammana, the object, is something else. The consciousness is something else. Always the consciousness cannot appear without cognizing an object, without focusing on an object, without knowing an object, without being aware of an object. Therefore, when we talk about a consciousness, always keep in mind it is aware of something. It is aware of something. And the next fundamental is the consciousness can never be aware of itself. A consciousness can never be aware of itself. So then we can think, can't we be aware of our conscious experience? Can't we think about it? Yes, we can think about it. But how does it happen? Consciousness appears, disappears. A new consciousness appears, disappears. It appears, disappears. But why? What happens? There's a generation going on. We feel it as one thing. We feel it as one thing. But it is different conscious experiences happening, one after another, one after another. A certain conscious experience cannot be aware of itself. A different conscious experience can be aware of an already happened conscious experience. It is possible. The consciousness, one consciousness cannot be aware of itself. Another consciousness can be aware of another before previous consciousness. Sometimes maybe some rarely about a future consciousness, but not about itself. So that is also a very basic fundamental. It's aware. So in this case, the object of consciousness, this consciousness, if you take this, the number B consciousness, this A consciousness, awareness of the object of B consciousness is the A. The A consciousness can never be aware of itself about A. The simile given is a knife can cut other things, but the knife cannot cut itself. The knife cannot cut itself, but it can cut all the other things in the world except itself. So likewise, the consciousness cannot be aware of itself, but it needs an object. It can be aware of all the other things, whatever, depending on its capacity. Now this conscious experience of becoming aware of an object, what the Buddha, what the Theravadians advocate is, now in this experience, there are few aspects to be understood. Consciousness means when we talk about consciousness, we have to talk about the objects or the arammana. So there are countless number of arammanas in the world, infinite number we can infinite number of objects. So, but the thing is, we are aware of one thing at a time. We are aware of one thing at a time. Sometimes we can be aware of many things, like we see a group of rupas in front of us, things in front of us, but what we see is only color. What we see is only color. So there, even though we may have many objects at a time, we are aware of objects which share similar characteristics, So therefore, in a one conscious experience, we cannot have completely strikingly different objects. We cannot have strikingly different objects. Like, for instance, you cannot focus on nama and rupa both together at the same time, because they have completely striking different characteristics. But we can be aware of various colors at the same time, because the color, the basic characteristic of color is to be is the sensitive nature to the eye. So they share similar qualities. So many objects can be taken at one time when they share similar qualities. Even nama and rupa can be taken at once, focusing on their similar qualities of khanda qualities, ayatana qualities, and so forth. But the focusing on the nama quality and rupa quality, they cannot be taken at once. So normally we say, just we'll go into the simple explanation. Consciousness is aware of one thing at a time. Consciousness is aware of one thing at a time. But the thing is, there are lot of number of objects to be taken, can be taken. So this conscious experience to happen, one object has to be selected. One object has to be selected. It means our conscious experience is focused on a one object. Is focused on a one object. Think about, now there are 7 billion people in the world, but we think about one of our beloved ones, that's specifically person A for things. Now this A is a beloved one, right? So at one time we think about this beloved person. Think about this beloved person. So the consciousness has to have a focus on this person, because conscious experience is always has a certain degree of its awareness. It has at least a minimum level of degree of awareness. So therefore, it focuses on this, getting out, leaving apart all the other 6.99999 billion people, only on this person. Right? We are just taking a basic simile. This can be made, the simile can be made more complicated. We'll just go with the basic simile for the understanding. So this object has been focused, has to be focused. So this focus we have is a very basic attribute of this conscious awareness. There is a focus. Without the focus, it's impossible. The conscious awareness cannot happen. Now think about our personal experience. We think about someone, about our parents, about our mother, father, brother, sister, sometimes about the wife, husband, children. So when we think about someone, just sometimes there can be thinking about two people at a time, because they have shared personalities. As humans, they have shared their personalities. Personality means the shared human qualities. Just we'll take a simple example. Think about someone we love the most. We think about this person, so we avoid all the others. So there should be a focus at this person. That is a must. Now when we think about this person, we have a very pleasant feeling. We have a very pleasant feeling that we can feel, that we can experience. Why is that? Think about a very unpleasant enemy. If the B is an enemy whom we don't like, there is a focus towards him as well. When we think about this person, there is a focus, but with an unpleasant feeling. With an unpleasant feeling. The content of the consciousness, content means the conscious experience. It's not only confined to the focus. There are some emotional qualities that can be felt in that conscious experience. So this pleasant feeling is a one another aspect of this conscious experience. Then sometimes we get joy. We get joy in him. We are quite happy. Pleasant feeling in one thing, joyness is one thing. Joyness is one thing. Then we also have, in that conscious experience, we have a certain recognition. Recognition. It's not that, how do we think now, when we think about our beloved one, it's not necessary that we name him always. It doesn't come, that the name doesn't come to our mind always. But the recognition here means our mind knows it. Our mind knows that it is a particular person, different from others. Our mind is able to distinguish it. For example, if you think about another person and think about this beloved person, we know, we are able to distinguish him from others. So that is called recognition, which has to be explained in detail. We call it sanya, right? But just keep in mind that there is always a recognition. So likewise, in this conscious experience, we have focus and some other emotional or some other mental aspects. So in this all, so it can be detailed, the list will go further. Then in this all the dynamics of this conscious experience, the characteristics, the foremost is the focus. Without the focus, none of this is possible. Without the focus, none of this is possible. So therefore, focus here is the forerunner of this conscious experience. All these secondary, these happen based on this focus. So in a conscious experience, the focus towards an object is called chitta. Focus is the chitta. It focuses on one object. It delimits the object, delimiting the object from others. And this acts as the surface for other mental aspects to function. All the other things, that the characteristics that we can experience in this conscious experience, that we can observe in this conscious experience, are called cetasikas. The focus is the chitta. The remaining are the cetasikas. There are a number of cetasikas. Now think, can we distinguish or separate them practically? No. A conscious experience, to become a complete conscious experience, according to Theravadians, just mere focus cannot happen alone. Always there is some kind of a feeling, some kind of a recognition, some kind of, even in the focus, there are aspects of focus. So likewise, the thing to understand is cognition has a certain degree or level below which it never comes. So therefore, always they happen in a cluster. Cluster means together. So that's why we say chitta and cetasika happens together. Chitta and cetasika happens together. They are inseparable practically, but intellectually we are able to separate them. We are able to separate them. So there are 52 types of such mental factors. We call them mental factors. We call them mental factors. And one type of a chitta, because it's a focus. In terms of focus, every cognition has a focus, and that is the chitta. But these mental factors may change based on the cognition that we, according to the object, according to the state of our mind, according to the function of the cognition. Then it becomes very complicated, little bit complicated. What types of cognition, conscious experiences we have, according to the situation, according to the object, according to the state of our mind, according to our mood. it can change. So what the Buddhism says is, Theravadian says, now we are going to see various combinations of chitta and chetasikas, various combinations we are going to study. It's a study of our practical life, about ourselves. So what happens? What we think, now these chitta and chetasika happening is a one conscious experience, another conscious experience with different factors of mentalities, another conscious experience. So this keeps on happening one after another, one after another. In Buddhism, one aspect is we should be able to distinguish this conscious, the lineage of these conscious experiences one after another. So we find it's not one person is always aware of this world. It's a lineage or a generation of conscious experiences happening one after another. In a conscious experience, we find it's not even a conscious experience, it's not a one thing. It's a combination of two different things like chitta and chetasikas, not only two, it has number of mental factors. So it's a cluster happening, going on. So what happens when we focus on these elements, the mental elements separately, we find that there is no person called I whom we can call as we think at the person I. So therefore, the Buddhism is the practice of Buddhist teaching is to understand this reality practically. This is an intellectual study. This is the scriptures that we are studying, what the mechanism is. And we should be able to observe this mechanism practically. And when we observe, naturally, our wrong beliefs, wrong ideologies would disappear, and we come into the enlightenment. And for that, we have to bring the aspect of rupa also, because it's also practically connected. So nothing to say about chitta and chetasika. Even nama and rupa, we are unable to distinguish in practical life. So I, as a person, is working and doing all this stuff. So what happens when we consider it as an I? We naturally tend to like it. We naturally tend to feel dear about it, to protective about it, because that we consider it about one thing, one person. But when we see the duality, the idea of I disappears, because it's not the same thing, but there is still a danger. Some would say this nama is the self. So that's why some believe that there's out of the body, inside the body, there is some immaterial thing called the soul, which migrates from life to life. Soul is not the body, body is not the soul. There are doctrines even during the Buddha's time. So what the Buddha wanted to say, even this conscious experience, nama, is a constitution of two main elements, the chetasikas, the mental factors, and the chittas. Then the next thing, so then it's not a one thing, it's not a one soul, it's a combination of things. And those things happen in generations, one after another, one after another. So we are supposed to see this, observe this. So then the idea of self completely dilutes, and the person starts to lose the attachment towards oneself. Because lose the attachment towards self means there's no self to be attached. That's the point. It's not a suppression of the attachment towards the self. When we understand there is no self, there's nothing to be attached. So therefore, these are the points that the distinction between chitta and chetasikas. Now, next week, I'll be focusing on this aspect of chitta, not in very detail, but what is a chitta? Now it's the focus. Now, what happens as an introduction to the next lecture, now this experience, conscious experience, together with chitta and chetasikas, we are able to label different conscious experience. The combinations are different. We see different combinations. So This chitta means together with chetasikas, right? Together with chetasikas. So we find 89 different combinations in Buddhism. We talk about 89 different combinations. Combination means focus and different mental factors. And those combinations are not only based on the difference of the ingredients, these ingredients. There are some other factors, the mode, the situation, the place where the consciousness arises, the functions it's performed. The combinations are based on various criteria, but we study about 89 combinations according to Theravadians that we experience in our day-to-day life. So we'll be starting on them from next week onwards, and then we move on to Rupa, and to them later the other aspects of Paramatta. So today we discussed about the Paramatta Dhammas are divided into Nama and Rupa. Nama is consciousness, Rupa is material thing, and why Buddhism doesn't advocate materialism. It expresses about a mental immaterial thing called consciousness, but they are greatly dependent upon each other. In the consciousness, the arena of consciousness is again divided into two aspects, chitta and chetasikas. And how do we understand practically? Chitta is the focus towards an object. The mentality, the chetasikas are the other mental factors that we can observe in such a conscious experience, connected with the focus, which is inseparable practically, but intellectually the distinct can be observed. And we find 89 such combinations, and that's what we will be studying from next week onwards. Yeah, so I conclude the lecture. Thanks for listening, and the floor is open for Q&A session.
Okay, sadhu. Thank you so much, Bhante. So, hi everyone. So, if you have any question, please put it in the chat box, or you can raise your hand, and we will unmute you. Hi, Bhante. So, in the meantime, may I have a question? Sure. So, yeah, the question is about the detailed classification you gave for the Dhammas at the beginning of the lecture. So you have the one, you have Paramatta Dhamma, and then the Panyati, and then you also gave the list of the 5 or the items, kind of in between of those two. Yes. So I'd like to know kind of the relationship between this kind of classification and another kind that I'm aware of, which is the 5 Nyaya Dhammas. So we know that there are the 5 Nyaya Dhammas: Sankhara, Vikara, Lakkhana, Panyati, and Nibbana. So how do they connect to each other?
Thank you for that question. So there is a classification called the Nyaya Dhammas. Nyaya Dhammas means the objects that can be known, that should be known. Both the meanings are possible. That can be known or should be known is Nyaya Dhammas. We normally say this was the object range of the Buddha's wisdom. Object range of the Buddha's wisdom. So we have Nyaya Dhammas. We have Sankhara, Vikara, Lakkhana, Panyati, and Nibbana. Right? Sankhara is the Paramatta Dhammas we discussed, Paramatta Dhammas. And Paramatta Jatika, Anupanna Dhamma, Upadino Dhamma also fall into this category. We don't need to find, because they are stages of the Paramatta Dhamma. So we put them in here, but there's a slight difference which we will discuss in a certain lecture. They are connected to Sankharas, but not fully, but we cannot distinguish them as a separate element because the Kathavattu denies that. Then Panyati is this. Yes, that is clear. Nibbana was the asankata paramattas. This is the conditioned realities in the first list. Nibbana here. Then this vikara. Vikara means in the anipanna rupas. In the anipanna rupas, we have certain things called akasa and 2 vinyati and 3 vikara rupas and 4 lakkhana. 4 lakkhana. So though we say it's 3 vikara, another explanation is both vinyati and vikara are all called the vikara. Vikara means like there is a alternation, change has happened. So vinyati and vikara in the anipanna rupas fall here. They fall here. Then upachaya santati jarata anichatha for the 4 lakkhana rupas fall into lakkhana, and anicca dukkha anatta also fall into this lakkhana. Akasa dhatu and the huge space are identical because akasa dhatu means there's the original space. In that space, when 2 rupa kalapas appears, the space was originally there. The existing gap between these two, which was already there, is called the akasa dhatu. So therefore, the space and the akasa dhatu are identical. But in the Theravada tradition, we have not recognized space as a separate thing. It's considered as the empty thing, empty space where all the conditioned realities exist. So I don't know how to fit into this, but it says that space is something which has no beginning, no end, and no limits. Then we come into these two, sampacce sati and gati. Right? These can be put into all the aspects, sampacce sati and gati. So in this Neya Dhammas, another thing in Buddhism we have is the 5 niyama. 5 niyama. 5 niyama. So this niyama and Neya Dhamma, both collectively, we'll be discussing this at the end of this session of these 20 lectures. We can also distinguish them as Dhamma and Dhammata. Dhammata is niyama. These are the laws of the world. These are particulars, the things that exist, dhammas. So niyama is 5-fold: uttu niyama, bija niyama, kamma niyama, chitta niyama, and dhamma niyama. So these pacce sati and gati, pacce sati, some pacce sati, not all pacce sati. What we are talking here is anantara, samanantara both, and asevana and pakatupanisaya. These are the 3 pacce forces that I'll be discussing. Then gati is we call it, you can find this in yoni. If you type this word yoni is like the species, like the human species, the animal species, and so forth. So that the Theravadians say the kamma decides the yoni. Yoni makes the form. Like why every cat have a similar feature? Because it's decided by the yoni, according to Theravada. All humans in all the kappas, even they don't have a genetical relationship because the first humans were born spontaneously. So all those have the same human figure. So there is something called some kind of a law which determines the appearance of humans and so forth. We'll be discussing them detailedly. So this gati and yoni, we are not talking about the kammaja, rupa, or chitta chetasikas. We are not talking about the land where they are born. This is the third aspect of gati. So this gati, we can call gati, bhumi, yoni, all the names. You can find this name in commentaries, yoni, idea of Mahasiva Thera explained in the commentaries. So this one is more into the niyamas, dhamma niyamas. But when we study, we will find that they also have some kind of a relationship to a dhamma, very close to dhamma, not exactly a dhamma, but they are something floating in between. When we come to that discussion, I think most of you will observe that there is some kind of a floating thing. The floating means it's unable to see and black and white distinction. Pacchaya Sati is a Pacchaya force, like we are talking about this force of the Pacchaya. They are greatly attributed to Sankhara. The Anantara Pacchaya is the previous Chitta, Asevana Pacchaya is the previous Javana, Pakatupanisaya Pacchaya also a previous Chitta. But there is some kind of a force or some kind of an element that remains, supports the following Chittas according to the Pattan Uddesa deepening. So it should be attributed as a part of Sankhara, but when you go into the literature, it seems like they also fall into, they are also related with Niyama. So that's why I put them in between, because there cannot be a very clear cut to them. So these two would not fit here. That's true. These two would not fit here, and they are related to certain Niyama. So when we say Neya Dhamma, the things that Buddha knew, these are the laws that Buddha knew. So into this, both all will be fit. Right? Uttu Niyama, we have Bija Niyama, we have Kamma Niyama, Chitta Niyama, and Dhamma Niyama. This is all what Buddhists. Now, if you take these two, these all can be explained in Buddhism. All that can be explained in Buddhism. But for example, sometimes they how to say, overlap. Sometimes they overlap. For example, Tilakkana, this is the three characteristics are called Lakkana here, and also literature advocate them as a Dhamma Niyama. So some parts may overlap, something, but this is how it fits it.
Okay. Thank you so much, Bhante. Sadhu. So I see a hand here. So go ahead, Sajali.
Yes.
Good morning, Bhante. I have two questions. So the first one, we explain about the two types of the coexistence. You say the Nama has a great effect on the Rupa, and the Rupa also has effect on the Nama. So in this, I think it's only talk about the Panjavogara, right? It's not like Ekavogara or Jaduvogara.
Yes, I was talking about the Panchavokara. Yes, you are correct.
Oh, okay. So my second question is about the Jada as the object. So the Jada, as we know, can take the past or future object as well. But for an ordinary person, how he observes the future object without the supernormal power?
Right. So for that, Sally, we need to understand there are three levels of cognition, three levels of knowing. One level is the observation we do with our five sense doors. With our five sense doors, we can directly see, hear, smell, taste, and touch objects. That is a very distinct, direct sort of experience. Then we have another direct experience, like in Abhignana, as you said, the supernatural powers. Some can see the past life, some can see the certain future, some can see far away objects. We call the supernatural powers, like the Buddha and some Savakas had. So this is also one sort of a direct experience. Then we come to the third category of the experience. There we have clear experiences. Then we have general type of experiences. Sometimes we have misleading experiences. All fall into this category. For example, in Vipassana meditation, normally as it is practiced today, for example, when a consciousness arises, suddenly with another consciousness, we observe that and see it as impermanent, suffering, and non-self. That experience is also very vivid, but I think you can see it's different from the five sense experience. It's different from Abhignana experience. It's a normal experience that we have, but it is more vivid. We can see, we can remember what happened to us in this life, what happened in that consciousness, what sort of feeling it was. Then another, we say obscure, like a I may use the word obscure because it's not very vivid, for instance. Now, according to Theravadians, this is something that we need to discuss in the chapter of Arammana. Now, someone is sitting here. There is a wall. And another person walks by. Another person walks by. I don't know who is he, but I know there is someone here. I can feel it. I can hear the voice. I can hear the noise. The noise is Saddha. Then I think about this person. I imagine about this person. I don't have a clear, vivid experience about him as I see him directly. So this is like an imagination, we can say inference, whatever it is. It's not vivid as from five sense doors. So in such an experience, according to the Theravada tradition, our object is the actual person. Our object is the actual person, but he was visualized in a different manner. I thought my friend is coming, but it was a different person. So when I think about that person who is coming as my friend, even though I visualize as my friend, according to the Theravadians, my real object is this person. My real object is this person. Why? My mind has focused on the person who is coming beside that wall. So the visualization was, there were different concepts about him, different perceptions about him, didn't matter because the mind was focusing on that particular person who was coming with a different misunderstanding. So here we say, even though I thought him as my friend, my real object is not the real friend, is the person who was walking, but I understood him wrongly. So likewise, when we think about the future, what would happen, this consciousness and so forth, if we generally think this consciousness would occur maybe a few years, something so forth, tomorrow and so forth. If we are supposed to live, what happens? Our mind, according to Theravada, is said to have a future object. It's said to have a future object. It may change. I may think it will be a kusala chitta, but it be a akusala chitta. I may think this will happen, but it didn't happen as it is. But in the general sense, if we thought about a rupa, if we thought about a chitta, so that we say that's how a future object can be known. Think about the simile of the person beside the wall, according to Theravadians. Then another thing is, there was no one, just a normal sound, just something fell down. I think it's a person, but it was just a sound. Something has accidentally has happened. I think about a ghost, think about a person. So in that case, I have a certain object in my, I think about this person, but the object is not really there. It's not really there. These are factually empty objects, So in that case, didn't the conscious experience have a real object? There was no real object, but he visualized a person. So in this case, the person was coming. I think him wrongly. There was no person. I thought him as a person. In both the occasions, there was a visualization. If the person was really there, visualization and the real person, both can be found. If the person was not there, is a visualization, but not the real, nor factual object. In the Theravada perspective, it can be proven with evidences, according to the Theravada standpoint, that in such a experience, if the real object is factual, even the visualization is wrong, we consider this as the real object. This is the object of the conscious experience. This has to come into a lot of discussion, I know that. Then if the object is not factual, empty, but there is a visualization, Theravadians count this as the object. So always I mentioned the object is something outside, something apart from the consciousness. But there is always, in all the cases, some kind of a visualization, I would call. Visualization is attributed to Sanya mainly. Vedana also plays a huge role in it. Sanya and Vedana plays the biggest role in this visualization. So in this visualization means it's not just visualizing something. When someone is coming, I think him as someone, but when he comes to the curtain, I understand he was a different person. So this is what I mean as the visualization. So in all the occasions, there are two aspects of the object. This is considered as, because the thing is, why the Theravadians call this the object? When it comes to karma, this is what matters. This is what matters. Because, for example, there is a story in Vinaya. One thieves, a group of thieves, killed a group of monks. They want to plunder their stuff. All were killed. Then one of the thieves were regretting about their actions, or maybe because of to get rid of the punishment. I don't know what was the reason. He ordained in the Buddhist dispensation. So he just killed a man. That's all. He didn't have any perception of who was he and anything. Then what happens later on, while he was ordained monk, he got to know among that group of monks whom they killed, there were arahants. There were fully enlightened beings. Killing an arahant is considered as an anantariya. It's like he's destined to be born in the hell, and it's the end of the story for him in this life, not in the entire life. It doesn't mean that he cannot do good things. So, and also then Buddha said, one who has killed an arahant should not be ordained. Accidentally, if he's ordained, he should be disrobed. Same thing for killing matricide, patricide, and all this. So what happens? He got to know about him as an arahant many years later. But the Buddha considered, even though he didn't know he's an arahant, he had the perception of a normal person. He is responsible of killing an arahant. So what was the Buddha's idea? Even the visualization idea was wrong. Idea was not correct. He has no understanding who he was. The karma is made, karma is counted based on the real qualities of the real object. Therefore, according to the Theravadians, even though there is a visualization, maybe it is misunderstood. The object of the cognition is this. But there is a problem. In some cases, we cognize certain objects, but there is no factual person, factual thing like that. For example, according to Buddhism, a creator. People worship a creator. But according to Buddhism, there is no such object a person who has created and observing the entire world. It's all happening because of laws. So, but still, when we visualize or pray to him, there is a visualization in the person. So this conscious experience is not factual according to Buddhism, because there is no thing to be counted as the real God. So in such cases, Theravadians say, still there is an object, that is what you have visualized. But if the object is actually found, we take this as the object. Now think about the future. If the future is going to happen truly, what happened, we consider this is the object, a future object. If it is not going to happen, it's just a mind idea, which is not actual. So this is how I would explain. So for that, we need to go into the third aspect of cognition, the general type of cognition. This includes the cognition do you have in Vipassana. This includes the cognition when we think about someone who is beyond our sight. And this also includes the cognition that happens in false beliefs.
Okay.
Is it clear, Siane? Okay.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Thank you, Bante. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And I see another hand and one question. So this question is short question. So they just want to know the information about the Singhali lectures. So they want to, because they want to join.
Or the Sinhalese lectures. It's every weekday. Okay, I'll write it. You know, every weekday, Sri Lankan time, 8 to 9:30 p.m. 8 to 9:30 p.m. I think we have already done 20 plus lectures. All are uploaded in the YouTube as the English lectures. Yeah, this is how.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Bante. And I see another hand here, Bante. So from Ananda Mahinkanda. So please raise your question, please.
Bante, Thiruvan Saranai. Actually, I have a different question, but just the answer that you have given in relation to the monk, the Arhant who was killed unknowingly. It's kind of a little contradiction. Like when you think about Chetanaham Bhikkhave Kammam Vadami. So now he did not have the intention of killing an Arhant. So in that case, how can we reconcile between what you said and the reality? Maybe Buddha has told him to disrobe for another reason. Maybe he knew at that time, at the time of killing, he was killing an Arhat. I don't know. I'm just thinking, could it be that, or I'm just asking.
It's a good question. Yeah, since we discuss about this matter with the question.
And I have another question I can ask you later, actually.
Okay, you can ask the both questions. I will answer together. Yeah.
Okay. So the second one, Bante, now about the brain, the brain and the mind and the heart, and the chitta is always coming up on and off.
Okay.
So this is how I don't know whether I'm right or wrong. I just want to get your clarification. Now, the brain, of course, is playing a part. So what I feel is that the brain to take object, the brain is necessary. Like, for example, when you think about the 6 sense bases, and those 6 sense bases have 6 particular objectives or the functions. When you get the eye, then I can only see the rupa, basically, and the ear can hear the sounds and things like that. So like that, when you get a Dhamma Rammana, to see an object, the brain has to be there. The brain has a sensory part probably to see the object, but the heart is what is being harboring the consciousness, basically bhavanga. So that's how, because definitely the mind is not the brain, and we know because when the brain damaged state, people can live. Brain dead people still live until the heart stops. So heart and the brain, I mean, the consciousness and the brain is different. But when you get objects like Dhammaramana, so the Dhammaramana has to be perceived by the brain. I think that's what I was thinking. I don't know if I'm right or wrong. It's like the ear perceives the sound, and the eye perceives the light, like that. So is that right? Is my thinking is right? So that's the second question.
Thank you for your questions, Mr. Ananda. Yeah. First, we'll discuss about the Arahant's case, that the example I gave. He didn't have an idea about he was an Arahant, but later the Buddha recognized him as an Arahanta Ghataka. So he said he's an Arahanta Ghataka, and to expel him from the Sasana, not out of no compassion, that was because he is unable to attain any sort of progress in this Sasana, and he is destined to be born in the hell of killing an Arahant. So the question was, did Buddha had any other objectives? Personally, I don't think, because the statement he gave was he's an Arahanta Ghataka. He's a person who has killed Arahant, and he should not be ordained. The same thing happens for a person who has killed Arahant in lay life and come into the monkhood, he should not be ordained. Someone who has killed the parents should not be ordained. So the statement was given in general, and it says for all the 5 heinous deeds, killing mother, father, killing an Arahant, shedding the Buddha's blood with an evil intention, and making a schism in the monk society, being a monk, all are 5 heinous deeds. And also seducing a bhikkhuni, all are seducing a bhikkhuni is not anantariya kamma, but it's a very heavy kamma. So all should not be ordained, and if ordained by mistake or unknowingly, should be dispelled or expelled. That is what the Buddha's statement was. So this the question comes with the very special statement, Chetanaham bhikkhave kammang vadami. Chetanaham bhikkhave kammang vadami. So Chetana is the kamma, Buddha, according to Buddha. Chetana is the kamma, and it's true. Kamma itself is Chetana, but it doesn't cover the entire aspect of the kamma. Kamma is the Chetana, but the nature of the kamma is not only determined exclusively by the Chetana. Why is that? For instance, take a dana. You cannot just give a dana with mind. You can think about giving dana with mind, and there's a story about Tiloka Vijaya, one of the kings in the past, like Bodhisattva, thinking about a dana, like how he imagines about giving a dana. But it's very clear according to the Buddhist dispensation and according to the Theravada tradition, that was not counted as a pure dana, not counted as an exact dana. That was just the Chetanas were having. He was having some blissful, wholesome thoughts of giving. The generous thoughts were occurring in him. So dana, so something to have a dana, we should have something to offer which belongs to us even, and that which was taken, either temporarily taken as something and then offered to someone. We pluck the flowers from the trees and we offer it to Buddha. So something that should be there to offer. That's why a dana means. And also the amount of thing. Now we know we offer huge amount, like we offer 100,000, 200,000 offerings. The level of the dana depends on our wisdom, that's true. But also the amount we offer plays a huge role. That's why in the Dakkhina Vibhanga Sutta mentioned, Dhammena Laddhang. So when we think about it, for instance, we think about a dana, which is the most common kamma we do. The subjective part, the person, the donor we call, okay, the donor. Sorry. Then the thing which is offered in the receiver. So there are 3 aspects of dana. There are 3 aspects of dana. This is the Theravada perspective. If we take everything is in the mind, like there is no objective reality, that falls into the Yogacara tradition. Because Yogacharyans understood everything is in the mind. There is no objective reality outside. Theravadians are very clear on that. Because I think we discussed on this matter a few lectures ago. You refer to the Puppa Sutta. Buddha mentions there is an impermanent rupa advocated by the wise, and I say that impermanent rupa do exist. Atti bhikkhave aniccang rupang. And he says there is no permanent rupa. So the confusion comes sometimes in the Yogacara aspect, because in the Mahakachayana Gotta Sutta, Buddha mentioned Attiti is one aspect, Natti is a one aspect. It's just using the word Atti and Natti, the Theravadians, and it's when we scrutinize the Sutta, it is very clear. Buddha never advocated that there is no dukkha, because in Kachayana Gotta Sutta, in the Achelaka Kassapa Sutta, Buddha mentioned that dukkha is atti kaccapa kassapa dukkha, because he asked the question, is there is no dukkha? He said, yes, there is dukkha, and dukkha is fully equalized with the 5 aggregates in Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. Panchupadana Khanda is dukkha. So I think we explained this in lecture number 4, as I remember. Lecture number 4, we gave a detailed explanation. How do we prove as Theravadians that there is an objective reality? It's not something which is in mind, but there was a school that advocated that everything is mind-made and that belongs to the Yogacharas. And the Madhyamikas were there who said even the consciousness does not exist and it is just the emptiness is there. Madhyamikas, how the Nagarjuna's doctrine were interpreted by some scholars. Some scholars interpreted it differently. So according to them, nothing exists. Yogacharas, everything exists on the mind, everything is mind created. Theravadians have objective reality, but they were different from Sarvastivadians, because of Theravadians said in objective reality what exists really exists in the Paramatta Dhamma level, not in the entire category. Paramatta Dhamma level is the Pachuppannas, but the Sarvastivadians said no, past, present and future all exist. This is how the Theravada school, the location of the Theravada school. Theravada school is very clear about an objective reality. The evidence they give is the Puppa Sutta, because there is no sutta in the entire doctrine. There's no sutta in the entire doctrine confirmed that Buddha never says there is no rupa. Buddha never says there is no vedana. Buddha never says there is no sanya. Buddha never says there is no sankara. Buddha never says there is no vijnana. The only thing that can lead to confusion is the Kaccayana Gotta Sutta. Atti is a one end, and Nati is a one end, and that sutta is advocating about a self, life after death, the life stopping at the death. So the consciousness, the self transmigrating or self is destructed at the death. These are 2 ends, and he teaches the Paticcasamuppada. Avidya exists. Avidya because of Avidya Sankara, because Sankara Vijnana. This flux is existing, and momentary existence is advocated, is expressed according to the Theravada tradition and the doctrine they have preserved. So that is a one point. So that's why we talk about a receiver. That's why we talk about a thing. That's why we talk about a donor. So because there are ample of evidences to show that Theravadins are talking about the objective reality. So now with this standpoint, how do we explain in the Theravada perspective? This is not the Yogaachara perspective. This is not the Madhyamika perspective. For example, Madhyamikas, one scholar argued that there are 4 reasons that he sees why a reality can never arise. Because arising comes from nothingness to happening. So he made 4 arguments why a reality cannot happen. So there are different doctrines that do explain about such doctrines. But when we come to Theravadians are very clear about an objective reality, and they have an explanation on that. So based on the Theravada teachings, what happens? The receiver is there, a thing is there, a donor is there. That's why if there was no receiver, he has not killed anyone. So Arahant is only in his mind. If there was no receiver, there was no Buddha to receive it. There is no, it means if there is no objective world, everything, this lecture is only in my mind, and I am just a creation of your mind, and all this existence collapses. It becomes a chaos. So without objective reality, the Buddhism, to my understanding, the entire world cannot exist. It's just a delusion going on. So Theravadians have objective reality. Now we come with that. So the donor side, he has the Chetana, he has the Panya, he has the Saddha, all these qualities in him. Then with the thing that is going to be offered. So Buddha mentioned, if someone offers with full Saddha, believe in karma and result, that karma increases. If less Saddha, less Panya, then karma is becoming lower. So the thing, if that thing, the amount that you offer does matters, because amount is greatly related with Chetana. We offer 10 rupees, we offer 100 rupees. That is a different kind of a donation. Then Sometimes the amount is counted relatively about how much you have. Someone who has 1,000 rupees offer 500, someone who have 10,000 rupees offer 500. There is a relatively effect. So that also comes into account. The amount comes into account, the exact amount, and how much you offer, compare the ratio, how much it is with your already existing wealth. That also counts into account. Then how it is obtained, the way the thing is obtained is also matters. So Buddha mentioned, if it is dhammena laddhang, if it was obtained righteously, the karma is higher. If it is obtained wrongly, the karma, the level, strong strength of the karma reduces. Then the receiver, the part of the receiver, the qualities of the receiver. If he was a virtuous high person who has eradicated defilements, the utmost donation was done. If it was a normal person, the donation, the level of the donation reduces. So all these things does matter when it comes to explain the level of the karma. When it comes to explain the level of the karma, they all matters according to the Buddhist teachings. So if the receiver is not playing the role, for instance, if the receiver is not playing the role, what happens? For example, if the idea of arahant, offering an arahant, if the idea what matters in the donor's side, we will be able to offer someone who is not an arahant, thinking that he is an arahant, and if you offer, and we may be able to get the results of offering an arahant. Because if it only matters this side. The same thing, for example, among the six heretics, better not to use the word heretics, the 6 great teachers who coexisted with the Buddha, 2 were considered as Buddhas. 2 others were considered Buddha. Purana Kassapa and Niganta Nataputta were also considered as Buddhas, fully enlightened, knowing everything by their disciples. So what happens? They offered many requisites to these 2 recluses who followed the wrong doctrine according to us. So if we only consider about the donor's part, they were offering to a fully enlightened omniscient Buddha who was Niganta Nataputta. They were offering to a fully enlightened omniscient Purana Kassapa. So if we don't take these into account, what happens? If only Chetana is taken into account, they are offering to Buddhas and they should get the same equal merit of offering to a Samma Sambuddha, because what matters is the person's mind. And this does not fit into the Buddhist teachings, because it's very clearly mentioned, offering a Samma Sambuddha, offering a Pacceka Buddha, offering a great disciple, offering an Arahant, offering a noble being, offering a normal ascetic, offering an unvirtuous person, offering an animal, the categorization is very clearly mentioned. Is very clearly mentioned. So if we ignore this part, what happens? If we ignore this part, what happens? Even we are able to offer an animal, thinking he is Buddha, we should be able to get the same results as offering a Buddha. So therefore, according to the Theravadians, the objective reality, the receiver, does matters. What we think matters. What we think matters to effect the Saddha, Panya, this aspect. If we know he is a real Buddha, the Saddha, Panya would increase. If he is not the real, if we don't know it, it may not reach to that higher level. So that's true. Then we come to the question of killing an Arahant. The question of killing an Arahant. So in that case, the person was killed. This person was killed. So he didn't know he's an Arahant. He had the weapon of killing a person. But what the factors of killing were completed. He had the intention. He wanted to kill. He knew this is a living being, and he killed it. What happens? Only thing is, so he has completed the killing a person. Only thing is, he didn't know that he was killing an Arahant. No one would kill an Arahant knowing that he's an Arahant. I don't think anyone would do that. So therefore, his perception had a misunderstanding. That's true. He, not misunderstanding, he didn't know he was an arhat. That's the only thing. He knew he was a human being. So he killed him. But what happens, according to the Theravadians, that perception is not going to negate his act of killing someone. So the action of killing, whether he knows or not, is the receiver's part. This is out of our control. This is belongs to the thing, and how we obtain the amount and everything. We have a control over it, how to get it, how much we offer. But this part is beyond our control. It belongs to the receiver himself. So that's why we kill someone. If he's an arahant, we get the attribute of killing an arahant. If he's not an arahant, it doesn't matter, because perception is the thing is, but none of this will be valid. None of this will be valid if the Chetana was absent. The Chetana was absent. I was walking, accidentally, I happened to kill someone because I didn't have the Chetana. Someone was killed, everything is completed except the Chetana. So none of this will be counted if Chetana is absent. But Chetana is not the only factor to count. Chetana is necessary. That's why Buddha said Chetana is the kamma, but Chetana alone cannot perform a kamma. But when we talk about a kamma, all the aspects, there's many dynamics, all the aspects should be taken into account. So then I'll come, I know there can be a lot of questions on this. We'll take it to a different discussion because time has already passed. A lot of time has passed. So the other question was, what was the other question? I forgot it now.
The brain, doctor. Sorry.
The brain. So yeah, shall we leave it to another for the next week because the time has really passed? Okay.
Yeah. Actually, this is a really a good explanation. Also, a lot of things to think about it. Actually, thank you so much, and a lot of merits for you for explaining.
Okay, sadhu. So we'll conclude the lecture because now I think almost 2 hours we have taken today. So wish you all the best, and with this merit, may the Buddha Sasana prevail for a long time, giving all the opportunities for many people to walk upon this path towards liberation. So Buddha Sasanang Chirantithatu, Buddha Sasanang Chirantithatu, Buddha Sasanang Chirantithatu, Sadhu, Sadhu, Sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you so much, Bhante.